Sorry for earlier. I was a little out of breath. This place is like a huge Stairmaster sometimes, trying to get everything ready. And welcome to our live stream on YouTube. We think we figured it out better this week. Hopefully we have, and hopefully you're able to hear more clearly and better than last week. But we're getting there, so we're working our way to perfection. This week, the gospel lesson is one of those that perhaps we've heard before, and it kind of, sort of, can somewhat resonate with us. It's a story that's only found in Matthew as it is, yet there are elements of it in Luke, perhaps, and stories in the Gospel of Luke. It's also some elements of it. But it connects majorly with Matthew. In Matthew, there are the stories of the grace and kind of surprise gifts at the end. And then there's also this idea of from the harvest comes what is sown, or cause and effect. This is one of those cause and effect stories. This is hard and fast and clear-ish for us to understand and to hear. 10 bridesmaids gather around waiting for the bridegroom to arrive. 10 of them brought their lamps, 5 of them brought extra oil. And yet somehow, some way, the bridegroom became delayed. I remember we did a small wedding here at College Place, and it's been some time ago, and it was the bridal party was one on each side for the bride and groom. It was a small wedding. The bride finally got ready right about the appointed time, and I looked. She's back there waiting to come in. You know how it goes, and I couldn't find the bridesmaid. So finally I knocked when they were getting ready there, and I'd already seen her out in the hall a couple times. And I said, "Where are you?" This was 15 minutes after we were supposed to start. And she said, "Well, I've got to put my shoes on." And I said, "Well, you better get them on, because we're going to have this wedding with or without you in there." She did kind of move around a little quicker at that point, but it's sometimes we have to wait on those things. So, but there's all kinds of reasons that the bridegroom may have been delayed. But that's really not it's not a historical tale. It's a story more about preparedness. They expect the bridegroom to arrive soon. In the gospel, part of what is always underlying in the stories of the gospel is the fact that the early Christians expected the return of Christ soon. This is a story about the end time. This is the story about the arrival of Jesus returning to earth. There are points in which it's promised that the people who hear these stories will not taste death. And so they're expecting a fairly short time. And yet, at 2,000 years plus later, we're still waiting, expecting Christ to return. As the night went on, it was getting late, and their oil began to run low. Some of them, the 5, asked to borrow it from the other 5. And the other ones said no. The ones that were prepared said no. I think I spend half my life solving problems, whether I really need to or not. I sit around sometimes and just anticipating what's going to go wrong in a situation and how it can be made better. Lately, I've taken on the task of removing giant privet from my neighborhood, an invasive species. And so the other day, I stopped, had a few extra minutes. I didn't have on real great clothes. I just stopped the car right there in the neighborhood, got the mattock out of the back, and went and took down 3 great old big giant privets that were growing in the edge of the woods. There are 3 less in the world. I can't stop it all, but I can do my part. I try to anticipate what problems might be, and to anticipate how I can change them. One of the other things that I do, sometimes if we've eaten together, when we can go out to eat together, you may notice that there are people, when the wait person brings a glass of beverage, that'll sit and drink the entire thing in one gulp, it seems, and then they're like, they never come back. Well, I've eaten out a lot over my life. And one of the things I've always figured out is that you anticipate when you might run out of beverage. So you can take a pretty big gulp at the beginning, and then you can take one with a little less gulp, and then a little less swallow, and then a little less, and a little less, being sure never to run out of liquid in your beverage glass until the wait person comes back around. You just kind of have to analyze. You're gonna run out if you keep drinking a whole lot of water, so just go slowly. And go slowly. I said these 10 bridesmaids, really what they would have needed to do is form a committee. As a good Methodist. And in that committee, they could have figured out that perhaps if we don't involve the 5 that came prepared, the 5 that are kind of unprepared halfway there, that if they could rotate the flame amongst those 5 candles and leave one burning and then be able to capture the flame just before the bridegroom arrived, well, they too could have been there when Jesus would have arrived or when the bridegroom arrived. They needed to share a little bit, needed to think through this, come up with a plan, a logical plan, reason, and organization. And they could have fixed it. But that's not what the story's about. The story's about being prepared, ready to go, and not necessarily being ready to go. Those that aren't ready, they go to the store at the advice of the others, and the groom comes and the party begins and the door is shut and locked. It's done. One of those cause and effects stories. None of us can know when the end might come or exactly when what the end brings. We only get one hymn, so I thought about this week, part of it would be Hymn of Promise, that 707 in our hymnal, that story of in the bulb there is a flower, in the seed an apple tree, in our end is our beginning, something God alone can see. That just resonated with me, that this idea of promise, we don't know what the end is, we don't know when it's coming, we don't know what it is, but in our end is our beginning. Something God alone can see. Bishop Jones, that was in our annual conference for many years, 12 years back in the day in the 80s, and he was retiring one of my first years at annual conference, and I'll never forget him saying, he said he was about his retirement, he said there were 2 things that I remember. One is, he said Tuck, his wife, and he were going through the stuff at the bishop's parsonage, and said there were 2 piles, her treasures and his junk. And the other one was the idea that he always said, I'm ready to go, but I'm not ready to leave. And I think that's partly what's at play in this text. Being ready to go, but not ready to leave necessarily. In looking through the commentaries for this passage, I learned from one of them that it's only 3 weeks to Advent. Well, if that's not something to get make your heart stop as a preacher in the midst of COVID, I don't know what is. But there are only 3 weeks to Advent. But Advent is one of those times that I really love. I know, Susan, you're ready to sing Christmas carols today. But Advent serves a purpose for us in the church, in the life of the church, in our lives, and those of us who shape our lives around faith. That Advent reminds us not only of the expectation of this baby Jesus coming, but also the triumphant return of Christ in the end time. Over and over again, we need to hear that message in our world and in our lives. Yes, there is a time promised coming when Christ will return, and that all that is wrong in the world will be made right. I need to hear that. Life is the same way. There is a point of us in the common way to say that is Jesus is going to fix it, everything. But we still, in our own lives and in our own work, we work to bring about God's kingdom in the world. There are times in life we wait. When a loved one travels, when grades or test results are coming back, will loom large in our lives, when we wait for news to arrive, when we even wait sometimes to be able to return to a normal phase of worship, to be able to actually hug and to shake hands and to participate in the life and the sacraments of the church. We wait. I know. A time that you've waited this week or the last 18 months. You've waited for the commercials and the calls about the election to end. You perhaps waited in line to vote, and we waited and waited and waited and are waiting to votes to be counted this week. And now we wait for concession speech, and we wait and we wait. And we wait for new beginnings for our nation and for all of its people now. Sometimes waiting seems even more than we can bear. Yet, that old song that some of us learned years and years ago, "Give me oil in my lamp, I pray. Keep me burning for the Lord. Give me oil in my lamp." I think that's what they're talking about in this passage. Commentator Arland Holtgren wrote that for modern Christians, this waiting, this anticipation includes care of the earth and making peace for the sake of future generations. It is necessary to plan for the long haul, to remain faithful, to be wise, and to stay strong in the world. One of the things I think that encourages us to build reserves in our oil in our lamps and in our reserve life is that when things are good, then when we can worship together, when we can hug one another, that we've saved those memories, that we've cherished those, that times that are good when we're able to deepen our wells, when we're able to refill our reserve containers, to grow our roots down deep into the life of faith and the trust of Christ, so that when it's necessary that we can too be prepared, that we can endure the wait that is, that when we can stand ready for what's next, for the hopefulness that is coming, and to be able to celebrate the full revealing of the kingdom of God, where everyone is welcome, where we are forgiven and loved, where sorrow ends and joy is unending, where life is forever abundant, forevermore. All glory, honor, and power be to the one who was, who is, and who is to come. Amen.